Elias stared at the empty trailhead, the gravel crunching under the boots of the search and rescue team, but he didn't hear them. He only heard the silence. It had been 6 hours since he looked back and saw nothing but white mist where Clara should have been standing. She was just 10 feet behind him. 10 feet, that was the distance between a future together and a lifetime of wondering why. The ranger put a hand on his shoulder, his voice soft. "Mr. Thorne, the temperature is dropping. We have to call it for the night." And that was when Elias knew the mountain wasn't giving her back. The car tires hummed against the asphalt of the Blue Ridge Parkway, a rhythmic, hypnotic sound that usually put Elias to sleep. But today he was wide awake. His hands gripped the steering wheel with a mixture of excitement and a nervous energy he couldn't quite suppress. Beside him, in the passenger seat, Clara was humming along to an old folk song on the radio, her hand dancing in the wind rushing through the open window. The air smelled of pine needles, damp earth, and that crisp, electric scent that only exists in the mountains just before the leaves turn to fire. They were heading deep into the Great Smoky Mountains, a place where the trees grow so thick they block out the sky and the mist clings to the peaks, like a shroud that never quite lifts. It was late October. The mountains were dressed in their finest robes of russet, gold, and deep, bruising purple. It was supposed to be their weekend. 7 years they had been together. 7 years of coffee shop dates, shared apartments, arguments over what movie to watch, and quiet moments that felt like home. Elias had a small velvet box tucked deep inside his backpack, hidden in a side pocket behind his extra socks. He had checked for it 3 times since they left their house in Raleigh. He planned to ask her tomorrow, at the summit of a trail the locals called Whispering Ridge. It wasn't the highest peak, nor the most famous, but Clara loved the name. She said it sounded like the earth had secrets to tell, and she was always the one listening. Clara was a botanist, a lover of moss and ferns, and the tiny, overlooked things that grow in the shadows of giants. "Look at that light, Eli," she said, pointing toward a valley dipping away to the right. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long, stretching shadows that turned the hollows into pools of ink. "It looks like the forest is breathing." Elias smiled at her. Her eyes were green, the exact shade of the hemlock needles she loved so much. "It's beautiful," he agreed, though he was looking at her, not the trees. He pulled the car into the small gravel lot at the trailhead of the cabin they had rented. It was isolated, miles away from the tourist traps of Gatlinburg, just them and the woods. They unpacked in the fading light. The cabin was rustic, smelling of cedar and wood smoke from a previous tenant. They made a simple dinner of pasta and red wine, laughing as they tried to get the old fireplace to catch. The fire eventually roared to life, casting dancing shadows against the log walls. They sat on the rug, Clara leaning her head against his shoulder. "I have a good feeling about this trip," she whispered. "I feel like something important is going to happen." Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. She didn't know how right she was. The next morning broke with a heavy, gray sky. The famous smoke of the Smokies was living up to its name. A thick, wet fog had settled over the world, reducing visibility to a few dozen yards. A regular hiker might have stayed inside, drinking cocoa and reading, but Clara and Elias were seasoned. They had hiked in rain, in snow, in heat. "It adds to the atmosphere," Clara insisted, lacing up her boots. "Besides, the moss looks greener in the fog." Elias couldn't say no to her enthusiasm. He packed the bagwater, trail mix, a map, a first aid kit, and the velvet box. They started up the trail at 8 a.m. The air was cold, biting at their cheeks, but the exertion soon warmed them. The woods were silent, not the quiet of a library, but the heavy, watching silence of an ancient place. There were no birds singing, no squirrels chattering, just the crunch of their boots on the fallen leaves and the rhythmic sound of their breathing. The trail was narrow, winding up through a tunnel of rhododendrons that twisted above their heads like gnarled limbs. "It feels like we're the only two people on Earth," Elias said, pausing to adjust his pack. Clara stopped a few feet ahead, turning back to smile at him. The fog swirled around her ankles, making it look as if she were floating. "Maybe we are," she teased. "Just Adam and Eve in the Garden of Appalachia." She turned and kept walking. Elias watched her ponytail sway, the bright red of her jacket the only color in a world of grays and browns. He took a mental picture, wanting to remember exactly how she looked in this moment, so full of life and joy. By noon, the fog had thickened. It was no longer a mist. It was a wall they could barely see 5 feet in front of them. The trees loomed out of the white nothingness like ghosts, appearing and vanishing in seconds. "Maybe we should turn back," Elias called out. His voice sounded muffled, dampened by the moisture in the air. "We're almost to the ridge," Clara called back. She was just a silhouette now, a gray shape in the white. "I just want to see the old oak tree the guidebook mentioned. Then we can go back." Elias hesitated. A prickle of unease ran down his spine, a primal instinct that whispered danger. But he nodded to himself. "Who's the tray?" Then they would go back, light the fire, and he would make the proposal there, in the safety of the cabin. "Okay," he shouted, "but stay close. I can barely see you." "I'm right here," she said. Her voice came from the left. He turned and walked toward it. The path forked slightly, splitting around a massive boulder covered in lichen. Elias went right. He thought she had gone right. He walked for maybe 30 seconds, his eyes straining against the white void. "Clara," he said. No answer. Stop." The silence of the woods seemed to press in on his ear. "Clara, stop for a second. Let me catch up." He waited. He expected her laugh, or the sound of her boots scuffing a rock. Nothing. Just the drip, drip, drip of condensation falling from the leaves. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced his chest. His spoon. Had she gone left at the boulder? He ran back, his boots slipping on the wet stones. He reached the boulder. "Clara, screameth." His voice didn't echo. The fog swallowed it whole. He ran down the left path. It wound downwards into a thicket of laurel. "Clarat answered me." He ran for 2 minutes, then stopped. If she was on the main trail, he was getting further away. He ran back to the boulder. He checked his watch. 12:15 p.m. She had been gone for 3 minutes. Just 3 minutes. You can't get lost in 3 minutes. He stood still, forcing himself to breathe. Maybe she was playing a joke. No, Clara wouldn't do that here. Maybe she stepped off the trail to pee. "Clara, I'm at the big rock. Call out." He stood there, turning in a circle. The fog seemed to be moving, swirling in patterns that looked like faces, like hands reaching out. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Elias began to run. He ran up the trail, screaming her name until his throat felt raw. He ran down the trail, thinking maybe she turned back. He checked his phone. No signal. Of course, the mountains didn't allow for such modern conveniences. The dread in his stomach turned into a heavy, leaden weight. He wasn't hiking anymore. He was hunting. He was hunting for the most important thing in his life. At 2 p.m., the light began to change. The gray turned a darker, ominous charcoal. The temperature plummeted. Elias was drenched in sweat, but he was shivering. He had been searching for 2 hours. He had found nothing. No footprint, no dropped water bottle, no piece of fabric caught on a thorn. It was as if she had simply evaporated, as if the fog had turned her into mist. He knew he had to make a choice. If he stayed out here alone in the dark, he might get lost too, and then no one would know where to look. He had to get to the ranger station. The run back down the mountain was a blur of terror. He fell twice, tearing his jeans, scraping his palms raw on the jagged rocks. He didn't feel the pain. He only felt the crushing absence of her. He burst into the ranger station at 4:30 p.m., breathless, wild-eyed, looking like a madman. "My girlfriend," he gasped, collapsing against the counter. "She's gone. The fog, she's gone." The ranger, a calm man named Miller with lines etched deep into his face, was moving before Elias even finished the sentence. Radios crackled. Maps were spread out. "Where did you last see her?" Miller asked, his voice steady. "An anchor in the storm. The boulder. About 2 miles up Whispering Ridge. She was right behind me." The search began within the hour, but the darkness was coming. Night in the Smokies is absolute. It is a darkness that feels physical. Teams of volunteers, dogs, and seasoned trackers moved up the trail. Elias wanted to go with them, but Miller held him back. "You're exhausted, son. You're in shock. You need to stay here. We need you to tell us everything she was wearing, everything she had." Elias sat on a hard plastic chair in the station, staring at the wall map. He listed the items mechanically. Red North Face jacket, gray beanie, brown hiking boots, size 7, a sketchbook. She always carries a sketchbook. He squeezed his eyes shut. The image of the velvet box in his backpack burned in his mind. I didn't ask her. The thought looped over and over, a torture device of his own making. The first night was the hardest. Elias didn't sleep. He sat in the station, listening to the radio chatter. Team Alpha, nothing in Sector 4. Dog picked up a scent near the creek, but lost its visibility. Cerro. We're holding position. Every crackle of the radio made his heart jump, hoping for the words "we found her." But the words never came. Outside, the wind howled through the valley, a mournful sound that sounded like a woman crying. B-Day-3, the operation had expanded. Helicopters with thermal imaging flew over the canopy, but the dense foliage and the relentless fog made their sensors useless. Hundreds of volunteers from 3 states arrived. They walked in grid lines, shoulder to shoulder, poking the underbrush with sticks. Elias walked with them. He refused to stop. He refused to eat. He walked until his feet blistered and bled, calling her name until he had no voice left. He started seeing things, a flash of red in a bush, but it was just autumn leaves, a voice on the wind, but it was just the creek. The psychological toll was shattering him. He began to bargain with God, with the universe, with the mountain itself. "Take me," he whispered to the trees. "Take me, and let her go. She has so much more to give." But the mountain was indifferent. It kept its secrets close. On the 7th day, the official search was scaled back. The survival statistics for a week in these temperatures, without shelter, were grim. Ranger Miller sat Elias down. "We aren't stopping. A-side Hentley, but we are moving from a rescue mission to a recovery mission." Elias stared at him, not understanding. Recovery. That meant a body. That meant she wasn't Clara anymore. She was remains. "No," Elias said. His voice was a broken croak. "She's strong. She knows plants. She knows what to eat. She's waiting for me." But weeks turned into a month. The volunteers went home to their families. The news crews packed up their cameras. The story of the girl who vanished in the mist faded from the headlines, replaced by politics and sports. But for Elias, time had stopped at 12:15 p.m. on that Tuesday. He returned to Raleigh, but he didn't return to his life. He couldn't go back to their apartment. It was too full of her. Her half-read book on the nightstand, her shoes by the door, the smell of her shampoo on the pillowcase. He moved into a small motel room on the outskirts of the national park. He spent his savings, he spent his days hiking the trails, alone, searching. He became a ghost of the forest, a gaunt, bearded figure that locals whispered about. They called him the Walker. He checked every ravine, every hollow log, every cave. He learned the patterns of the wind. He learned the language of the crows. He felt that, if he just looked hard enough, if he loved her enough, the mountain would have mercy. Winter came hard and brutal. Snow buried the trails. The rangers told him it was dangerous, that he would die out there. Elias didn't care. In a way, he wanted to. He would sit on the boulder where they separated, shivering in the freezing wind, talking to her as if she were sitting right next to him. "I'm sorry," he would say. "I'm so sorry I walked ahead. I'm so sorry I didn't hold your hand." 1 year passed, then 2. Elias eventually had to return to work, but he lived a half-life. He never dated, he never looked at another woman. How could he? Clara wasn't dead. There was no body. There was no funeral. There was just a void, a question mark stamped onto his soul. He kept her cell phone line active, paying the bill every month, calling it just to hear her voicemail greeting. "Hi, you've reached Clara. I'm probably out in the woods. Leave a message." He would leave messages. "I miss you. Love you. I'm still waiting." 5 years later, a group of off-trail hikers, bushwhacking through a remote, incredibly dense section of the forest, miles away from Whispering Ridge, found something. It was in a deep fissure in the rock, almost invisible from above, a flash of synthetic red material. The call came to Elias on a Tuesday afternoon. It was Ranger Miller, now retired, but he had kept the file. "Elias," he said, "you need to come up." The drive was a blur. Elias didn't feel relief. He felt a sickening dread mixed with a strange, dark hope. At the station, they brought out a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a tattered, muddy red jacket and a sketchbook. The pages were warped by water, swollen and stiff, but the leather cover had protected the center. Elias touched the book with trembling fingers. It was hers. Opened Italiano. The first few pages were the sketches she made on the drive up. The mountains, the cabin, a quick drawing of him driving. Then the pages turned blank, water damaged, but near the back there was one final entry. It was drawn in charcoal, shaky and faint, likely done by the light of the moon or in the dim gray of the fog. It was a drawing of a tree, the old oak tree she had wanted to see, and beneath the tree she had drawn a small, curled figure, sleeping in the roots. Underneath, in handwriting that was barely legible, were the words, "The fog is so heavy. I can't find the path. I'm going to sleep now. I love you, Eli. I'm sorry." There was no body. The animals and the elements had done their work over 5 years. But they found her ring knot, the engagement ring, but a silver band she always wore on her thumb. It was wedged into the dirt near the jacket. Elias wept. He wept for the terror she must have felt. He wept for the cold she endured alone. But mostly he wept because she hadn't evaporated. She hadn't been taken by spirits. She had been there, real and human, lost in the gray, thinking of him until the end. The mystery was solved, but the tragedy was cemented. The final scene of our story takes place a week later. Elias hiked up to the spot where they found the jacket. It was a beautiful, clear day. The sky was a piercing blue, the kind of day Clara would have loved. He sat by the fissure in the rocks. The woods were quiet, but it wasn't a menacing silence anymore. It was a peaceful one. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the velvet box. The velvet was worn now, the hinge loose from being opened and closed 1,000 times in the dark. He opened it. The diamond caught the sunlight, shattering it into a rainbow of sparks. "I was going to ask you." He spoke to the air, to the trees, to the spirit of the woman who was now part of the soil and the roots. "I was going to ask you to be mine forever." I guess you are now." He dug a small hole in the soft earth beneath the roots of a rhododendron. He placed the ring inside and covered it with the dark, rich soil of the Smoky Mountains. He placed a smooth river stone over it. He didn't say goodbye. You don't say goodbye to someone who lives in your heart. Elias stood up. He looked out over the vast, rolling expanse of the mountains. They were beautiful. They were cruel. They were indifferent. But they were also her resting place. He took a deep breath of the pine-scented air, adjusted his pack, and began the long walk back down. For the first time in 5 years, the fog in his mind began to lift. He was alone, but he was no longer searching. He knew where she was. She was everywhere. The mountains keep their secrets, they say, but sometimes, if you listen closely to the wind on Whispering Ridge, you can hear a love song, faint and sweet, echoing through the mist. A promise that death cannot break, a love that waits forever.